Okay, so I will begin this presentation. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isrina Fewings from the University of Western Australia, and it's my pleasure to introduce Stephen and Mavian Tay from the National University of Singapore. Stephen and Mavian's paper is entitled The Use of Peer Learning in Scenario-Based Student-Generated Questions across 2 modules during COVID-19. This will be a 20-minute presentation with a 10-minute question and answer at the end of the session. I'll just let you know that this session is being recorded, so you may wish to turn your questions off until the question and answer portion of this presentation. Feel free to pop your questions on the chat feature, which is located on the right-hand side of the screen, or feel free to raise your hand using the icon, which is located at the top left-hand side of your screen. If you like a question that's been asked in the chat and you wish for that to be responded to, feel free to like that question and we will get to that during the Q&A portion. And lastly, I'd appreciate if everyone could ensure their mics are muted during the 20-minute presentation. So Stephen and Mavian, over to you.
Thank you so much, Asrina, for the kind introduction. And again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those who have just joined us today. And again, to those who may be watching this recording. Okay, so as mentioned, Mavian and myself will be sharing a bit about our experience in implementing scenario-based student-generated questions in 2 modules. Why 2 modules? Because one of the feedback that we received was that whenever there's a certain so-called intervention that has been proven to be successful, one concern is that whether it's applicable to a separate module taught in a different context. And hence we thought this comparison between 2 modules would help with that concern that some of the educators who are interested in implementing this method may have. So with that, the outline is pretty simple. I'll talk about 3 things. First, what is the SBSGQ, which stands for Scenario-Based Student-Generated Questions, followed by the outcome, some of the results that we obtain, and some future plans. Okay, so with that, what is the SBSGQ? Now, before we answer that, let's look at the SGQ itself first. Now, the SGQ structure employs the following schema that you see. So first, in this student-generated question activity, the student is required to understand the content before they are able to generate a meaningful question. Okay, but most of the time when students embark on this exercise, as educators, we realize that there are certain misconceptions that they may have with regards to the learning objectives. Okay, and that is where facilitators are able to provide targeted constructive feedback, because different students may have different misunderstandings, okay, with regards to the learning objectives. And by looking at the questions that they generate, we are then able to provide constructive feedback. Now, this whole process is also beneficial for the student because there's active learning. Okay, they are required to understand the content and generate the question. Because most of the time, or at least in a traditional setting, it is usually the lecturer that will produce the tutorial questions and pass the tutorial questions to the students, and the students will attempt these questions. But in this case, the students themselves, together with the facilitator, generate the question for their peers to learn. And that's where the peer learning aspect is brought into this whole learning journey. Okay, now the other advantage that the SGQ process provides is that it also encourages students to take ownership, because now they are a part, they are an important stakeholder in this process, in the generation of questions. Now, the other thing that we would like to add is the idea, okay, of authentic assessments. Now, I guess there's no prize for guessing which of the 2 is authentic, but one of the things that we would like our students to experience is that sense of authentic assessments. Let me explain. Because interestingly, when we talk to students, some of the feedback that they gave us is that when they enter into the workplace, it is quite rare that the problems given to them by the employers are structured, or where the problems given to them are so-called defined. Most of the times, the problems are quite open-ended. One example would be there's this issue, let's say within the campus or within this department. Can you think of a way to solve it? It's very open-ended. Okay, and so we, inspired by real work type of scenarios, what we tried to do in the SGQ that we have is to implement, or how do you say, to incorporate a scenario, hence scenario-based SGQs. We want students to incorporate an actual scenario that they see in the industry into the questions that they developed, okay, thereby enhancing the authenticity of the questions. So with that, we would, how do you say, develop the SGQ to this SB scenario-based SGQ, and I put the A over here because in addition, okay, to the question, we ask students to develop the answer as well. Because very interestingly, when we talk to the students, they shared that it is challenging to develop the question, but when they develop the answer to the question that they generated, it helped them iron out some of the kinks or misunderstandings that they may have with regards to the learning objectives. So you may find some elements that are similar to the previous slide on the SGQ slide, which is, active learning, encouraging students to take ownership, and facilitators providing targeted constructive feedback. But the words in orange, such as, the higher orders of Bloom's taxonomy, using actual scenarios in the work environment, and the development of the answer, these are the things that we added into the SGQ. So for a very, easy to understand visual guide, this slide shows the additions, the significant additions that we have into the SGQ, which is the development of the answer and using scenarios. So what are the significances and the relevance? Okay, it works both ways actually. For the lecturer, it encourages active learning, and with that, the student is engaged to a deeper level with the content that is being taught. Now, as I mentioned earlier, because we are using real-life scenarios, things that we see in the newspapers, events that we see in real life, the students are then able to establish the relevance between what they're studying with the work that they'll be engaged in upon graduation. Now, the third point that we thought was quite significant to share with you is that the lecturer would then be able to identify targeted areas for feedback, and the student, upon receiving this targeted feedback, will be able to have a better learning experience and mastery of the learning objectives. So how was it implemented? Now, over at the National University of Singapore, a typical semester lasts for 13 weeks with a recess week in the middle. So what we did was within weeks 3 and 4, we will introduce to students the idea of the Bloom's taxonomy. Why did we do this? Because we found out that not all students are familiar with what the Bloom's taxonomy is. And hence, once we share with students what the Bloom's taxonomy is, they would then be able to understand the higher orders of Bloom's taxonomy that they should be engaged in their generation of questions. Now, the other thing that we thought would be helpful is the week 6 ungraded submission of their first draft of questions. Then during the recess, I will provide feedback to the students based on their first draft, and in week 7 and 8, students will teach their peers based on the improved first draft by incorporating the comments provided. Then finally, in week 9, there'll be the graded submission. And if we to take a step back here and look at the whole process, there are elements of scaffolding, okay, where we help students to reach a stage whereby they're able to generate meaningful questions. And at the same time, there's peer learning, okay, incorporated into this whole structure. And again, feedback, when we talk to students, they found this to be quite interesting because of several reasons. First, they were able to learn of the new scenarios, actual work examples that other peers have found out and presented during this session. The other advantage that we heard from students is that through this peer learning, they were able to receive constructive feedback on how they can improve their questions as well. So we thought this was quite useful. And what we decided to do next is to look at the modules, okay, by which we can incorporate the SPSGQ. So over here, there are 2 modules, the research methods module and the energy management module. Now, we implemented this across 2 years, one without SPSGQ. This was before COVID. Okay, hence it adopted a face-to-face learning environment. But then COVID hit halfway, and hence we had to move online. And in this case, it was the cohort with the SPSGQ. Okay, so that is why one of the future work that we plan to do is to conduct another study whereby the students do not have the SPSGQ, but the mode of learning is conducted online, okay, for a fairer comparison. But this is what we have, and we try to draw out meaningful results from which we can improve our study. So let's go into the outcome. Now, looking at the grades, okay, how do we navigate through this graph? There are two things. Yeah, first, in the dark blue columns, it represents the cohort with the SGQ for energy management. The light blue columns represent the cohort without SGQ for energy management. And one thing that you'll notice is that if we look at the higher letter grades, the percentage of students, okay, with the SGQ is much higher than the percentage of students without the SGQ. Likewise, in the lower letter grades, we see the reverse. With the SGQ, we have less students in this category, but without the SGQ, we have more students in this category. And what was really interesting for us is, do we see the same effect in the other module, which is research methods? Because we would want to develop something that is applicable, that can be adopted across different modules. And the results over here was very encouraging because we see a similar trend as well, in that with the SGQ, we have a higher percentage of students in the higher letter grades. And with the SGQ, we have a lower percentage of students in the lower letter grades. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a workshop on incorporating SBSGQs. Understand that it's recorded, and I really encourage participants who are present here with us or who may be viewing this recording to take a look, and feel free to drop us an email if you have questions or you have comments about this intervention. Now, we then went on to understand, what the perceptions of the students are, because, it may work for them in terms of the final grades, but do they enjoy the process? How do the students perceive this whole experience? And this is where I'm going to talk about in this next few slides. Yeah. So when we ask the students, whether it was perceived to have helped them with their learning, most of them agreed and strongly agree. Okay. Next, the collective SGQ developed by the class, was it helpful for them? So this referred to the peer learning element. Yeah, where peers would present their SGQ to others, and the others would learn. Okay, and again, we see a similar response: agree and strongly agree. Now, on this note, I'd like to take a pause and share that the term SGQ over here, it's synonymous with SB-SGQ. Okay, because in the survey that we sent out, we did not use the term SB-SGQ, but the SGQ implemented in the cohort was actually the SB-SGQ. So I thought it's good to mention this to prevent any confusion that may arise. Yeah? Next, was it sufficiently challenging? Now, we implemented this question because one concern that we had was that it was too challenging, which may demotivate students, or it was too easy that students do not learn much from this whole intervention. And thankfully, most of them agreed or strongly agreed that it was sufficiently challenging. Okay, next, do they enjoy? Now, this was quite interesting because when we look at these results followed by the previous result, what we found was that although it was challenging, they enjoyed the process, which I think is quite important, because when they enjoy the process, the level of engagement will be much deeper, okay, in this activity. And then finally, would they recommend the use for future modules? Again, most of them agreed and strongly agreed. So with that results, what are our plans for the future? And this is where we go into the third segment of this talk. So some of the benefits that we found in this implementation is that because there is no hardware involved, there is no software involved, the adoption of this method, the barriers for adoption is much lower. Okay, and currently we are in talks with colleagues from civil engineering and psychology to explore how this can be implemented in their modules as well. Okay, the other thing that we thought was quite beneficial when we reflect upon all these results and the feedback from the students is that students appreciated that the mistakes that they made in the SBSGQ allowed us, to provide valuable targeted feedback. Okay, so that way the feedback that we provide is not generic, but rather personalized, and it's personalized because the mistakes that they made are unique to them. Okay. Then the third benefit is that there's active learning by students, because they are involved in the development of the questions and they enjoy the process as well. So future work would be implementation in the other disciplines, as I mentioned earlier, that would be working with colleagues in civil engineering and psychology. The other thing that we want to explore is also the comparison of the online versus face-to-face mode of learning with and without SPSGQ. Because as I mentioned earlier, the control cohort was before COVID hit. And when we planned for this study, we did not anticipate COVID to happen. And so the intervention cohort, unfortunately, was when COVID occurred and we had to shift online. So this is what we are trying to do to investigate to see the real effects of the SPSGQ. Then finally, and this is where we would really like to hear from you, okay? We would like to work with you and collaborate with you to see how we can explore collaborations between us and yourself. So with that, I understand, it's close to 10, and I really want to leave some time for engagement, for questions, for discussions. So please do share your thoughts and comments in these two links below. Okay, there's a QR code as well if you prefer. Now, the first link will lead you to the survey questions, and the second link will lead you to an infographic that Mavian has prepared. Okay, that it's a one-page summary of the nuggets of information that we found. That could be helpful for you if you're interested to explore the use of SPSGQ. So with that, I'd like to share this quote that personally, as an educator, I found to be very useful. Okay, because whenever I go for conferences, whenever I go and talk to students or colleagues, the information that I receive and the feedback that I receive would help me cause a change in the way I teach. And because of that change in the way I teach, my students benefit in their learning. And so this is a quote: "Change is the end result of all true learning," by Leo Buscaglia. Okay, so with that, thank you so much for your kind attention. And Mavian and I look forward to receiving your questions and helping you with your queries. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And Mavian, you've put up those links, thank you, in the chat feature. I think Verily had a question saying, would it be possible for an example of a scenario as well as the problem posing by students in the first stages before they engage in peer learning?
Thank you, Verily, for the question. So let me maybe go to this slide, the implementation slide. This is actually a very good question because it was one concern that we had. Yeah. So if we look over here, in weeks 3 and 4, we told students about what the Bloom's taxonomy is, what constitutes a lower order question, and what constitutes a higher order question. And at the same time, we also told them that if possible, students are strongly encouraged to use an actual scenario to structure their question. Okay, and interestingly, we found that the students were able to. Let me maybe show you some examples of the students' work. Okay, so this will be in the appendix slide that I prepared. So this is one example, of a scenario that the students developed. So they looked around, they looked at actual examples, and they were inspired, by this 5-story construction MNC. They've deleted the names, to make it because they did not want to identify that certain company. So they replaced the name of the company with a generic name, company ABC, from Phoenix, Arizona. And over here, they found that the CEO wants to reduce the high operating expense from electrical consumption. Okay, and I will not go through the details, but what the question really asks is that because they want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, the energy specialist, which is where the question comes in, is supposed to do an energy audit on their energy usage and emissions. So they've developed the question, which is A, identify an example under each scope of greenhouse gas emissions for the company. Now, they did not only develop the question, they even have the mark allocation and the answers provided. So you can see this is more of application. So in other words, they have learned what constitutes a scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. They are now supposed to apply this knowledge into the context that was provided by the students. Then they even have a calculation type of question over here where the equation was taught in the lecture, and the learning objective was students should be able to apply this equation in the context given to them. And again, this was demonstrated in this question and the answer. But what really surprised me in a positive manner was that they were able to go beyond the lecture notes. Okay, so over here, again, without going to too technical details, they were able to obtain a map. Okay, and this map is unique for different countries. Yeah, they were able to obtain this map not provided in the lecture. Yeah, but because they developed this scenario based in Phoenix, Arizona, they were able to source and look for this map. From there, develop the question and develop the answer. Okay, so when I took a step back and look at this, it was very encouraging because the learning objective was achieved, and they went beyond by looking at examples beyond the lecture, beyond Singapore in this case, because the lecture notes was heavily focused in the context of Singapore. So I guess going back to your question, right, which is, would it be possible for the students, to develop the scenario in the first stages? I would say that this is a very good example of how they were able to, but not all students have the same capabilities such as these students have, and that is where throughout the 13 weeks, the facilitator will be there to guide the students on the applicability of the scenarios and so on. Okay. Sorry for the long-winded answer, Verily, but again, let me know, yeah, if that has helped with your question, and if I failed to answer it, let me know again. I'll be more than happy to follow up.
There were some follow-up questions by Verily. I'm not too sure if you can see that in the chat feature.
Mm-hmm.
Were the assessments used for students with and without SB? I think you might have responded to that. And she said, nice connection between Bloom's and the problems generated.
Okay. So to the first question, let's look at this slide over here. Yeah. So the question, if I remember correctly, it's were the assessment used for the control and the intervention cohort the same? So the answer is yes. Okay. The only difference is that because now the cohort with the SGQ has the SGQ, so that constitutes a small percent of their, overall marks. Okay. So that could be something that we would explore in decoupling in future cohorts. But from our sense, when we look at the data and the mark allocation, it seems that this effect is indeed tangible. Okay. So the big answer is that the assessments are broadly the same. Okay, but the questions are not the same because we are concerned that the latter cohorts will share with the future cohorts, their notes and so on. And because of that, the latter cohorts will gain an advantage. So the assessments were tweaked a bit because we do not want to repeat the questions, but the difficulty level was the same. Yeah, that is to ensure a fair apple-to-apple comparison.
Anybody else have any questions for Stephen or Mavian?
And maybe feel free to share as well your thoughts or in case I've missed out anything.
Yeah, actually, for Verily's first question, whether it's possible for students in the first stages to create like a problem-posing questions, for peer before they engage in peer learning. If we go back to the implementation slide, slide number 8. Like building upon what Stephen mentioned, for the students, actually, we have during week 6, there's an ungraded submission for the first draft of their SGQ in the scaffolding stage. So actually, this ungraded submission, it actually helps those students who are weaker, who are unable to generate higher level questions during this stage. It's kind of like a safety net for them, as compared to diving down straight into a graded submission. Because the concern is that the SGQ is quite challenging. It can be quite challenging to some students, and we want to provide them with as much help as possible in the earlier stages. So that's why there's that ungraded submission first before they go on to the peer learning stage in week 7 and week 8. So during week 7 and week 8, it's when their SGQ questions are quite finalized already. kind of get the green light from Stephen that they are ready to go ahead to present to the students. Yeah, because the concern is also that sometimes students, they may not be presenting the right information, so they can teach, but then it may not be right. And then some other students, they may take it at the face level. Yeah, so the concern was that this might happen. That's why there's the week 6 for students to learn without any academic repercussions yet. Yeah, so I wanted to add in this point because I thought it might help with understanding why our curriculum is this way, why there are like multiple stages as compared to having one final graded submission. Yeah, thank you for the question, Verily.
And hopefully that helps. But of course, no, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us. And maybe what I'll do is, if possible, we would like to seek your help with the survey. So I'll just copy and paste this again in case it's missed. Yeah. Thank you, Sophia, for the very kind words. And Sophia and Verily, we would like to seek your help with filling out your comments and how we can improve if possible. And again, we provided the link to improve, the infographic, yeah, for you to take a look and reference it. And again, feel free to share your comments, because one thing that both Megan and I are really looking out for in this conference is, you know, how we can work with others and how we can improve this for the benefit of the students.
Okay, thank you both Stephen and Mavian for this very insightful presentation. I certainly am almost conducting a sort of reflexive practice in terms of, when you were mentioning international collaboration, what focus would that be in relation to my context in at our university. So I most definitely would be looking very much into that. What critical changes we could develop in terms of supporting your ISSOTL approach to, you know, the student generated questions. But on that, thank you. Hopefully you will continue to participate in other ISSOTL sessions at this conference, and I will end the session now. So thank you again.
Thank you, Gina, as well, for your kind help with the moderation.
Thank you.
Thank you.